topic for discussion in the legal matters, and this is concerning the government functioning and their buildings and their infrastructure, which is also known as Capital Vista. And to discuss this further, let me invite my friend from Ahmedabad, a very eminent lawyer, Mr. Jeet Bhatt.
Thank you, Chandrakant, for having me today in this discussion of the judgment of the Supreme Court in the Central Vista redevelopment and modification challenge. And I'm looking forward for this discussion with you.
Right, Jeet. So before we start the legal aspect, I just want to give a little bit of a preface to why this development is important for a country like India. So very briefly, I just tell the viewers that when the India got independence in 1947, the number of representatives in the parliament were decided on the basis of the population, and the population has almost like three times from that day in last 70 years, whereas the representatives in the parliament have not gone up. So it is like 530 and odd in the lower house, and about half of their strength in the upper house. So about 700 and odd uh, people are representing the Indians in the uh, judiciary or the Parliament of India. So, uh, the whole issue of expansion has been known to the Indian government for last 30 to 40 years, even before that. And the reason being that for some reason or the other, this expansion of the parliament was postponed. And at the same time, during the British Raj, a lot of Maharajas were having their palaces, summer palaces, when they come to meet the Vice Chancellor, Viceroys of India. They used to live in their own palace in the New Delhi area, which are now very old buildings. Some of them are almost like 250 years old, which requires the sort of renovation. And after the independence, these palaces were converted into various government buildings. So I think the government officers, when they are working from these buildings, they are at risk. So there are two aspects to the Central Vista redevelopment. One is expansion of the parliament, which is mandatory because the current parliament does not have space for extra member of parliament to accommodate. We need to expand. And why it is so critical? Because right now, one MP represents nearly 3 million Indians. If you do the math, which is very high, and 3 million cannot be adequately represented in the parliament. So that is why we need to increase the member of parliament, uh, and that will also have the democratic process. So I think that is a whole basis of this government going ahead with the redevelopment of central government buildings, which is also known as Central Vista. And recently there has been a judgment by the Supreme Court also. So I think uh, I will have Jeet talk more about it. So Jeet, over to you.
Yes, Chandrakant, you rightly said that this modification and redevelopment of the Central Vista is very much required today because when we became independent, our population was less than half of what is today. And at that time, uh, uh, around 530, which is the legislature which are in the lower house, are not adequate as they represent 3 million people in the country. So that was what was the object and aim behind having this redevelopment of the entire Central Vista and having a modern ultra-tech parliament. And as you are aware that this Central Vista lies in the heart of the capital in Delhi, within the Lutyens Bungalow zone, where the Central Vista is located between the India Gate and the Rashtrapati Bhavan. And the parliament, which was originally started construction in the year 1927, is a 93-year-old structure. And post 1971 census, where the total population of India was recorded around 54 crores, and the number of seats of the house was fixed at 545. But today the population has spiraled exponentially, and it is approximately more than 130 crore mark. And therefore, certainly, it is required to have changes in the number of parliament, the member of parliament. and which is expected to happen in 2026. And therefore, the present central hall of the parliament, which has a seating capacity of only 440 persons, which already falls short of the present need to accommodate members of both houses together during a joint session. And there is no scope to expand the existing central hall. And therefore, it was decided by the central government to construct a new parliament building with a futuristic approach, and the House of People being three times the size of the present number. So certainly, this was very much required and is a huge project. And the planning, which has been conceptualized, is that this will be opened in on the 75th Independence Day of the country in 2022, which is within 2 years, when the global G20 summit is also to be hosted by India in the same year. So the objective of this redevelopment plan was to have a new parliament building with space and technology to meet the present and emerging needs of vibrant Indian democracy. Also, to have a common central secretariat with all ministries in a single location for efficiency and synergy in functioning. Because as you said, that some of the offices are more than 100 years old structures, and also the government is paying a huge rent for all these offices. And therefore, it is desirable to have a common central secretariat with all ministries at one location for convenience as well as for efficiency and for saving the cost. And the third purpose was the Central Vista to be redeveloped as a world-class public space and venue for national and international events. So certainly, this is very much required and important project of the central government, which is very much essential to the democracy of this country. So the development, what was coming in the way, and what some of the petitions were filed before Delhi High Court, and ultimately it were transferred to the Supreme Court, and thereafter the Supreme Court finally coming out with a judgment 4 days ago on 5th of January, permitting the government to go ahead with this Central Vista redevelopment plan. The objections that were raised were basically that there was a change in land use of 8 plots, which were earmarked for redevelopment, and it came in the way of the Development Act, Delhi Development Act, and also with respect to certain clearances from the CBC, as well as certain clearances from the Heritage Site Board, also with regards to the environmental issues and environmental clearances required under the environmental notification, and also with regards to the principle of public trust, and also with regards to providing necessary information to the public domain, as the petitioners had alleged that certain necessary information was not provided in the public domain, which ultimately led to the redevelopment in a clandestine manner by the government, not bringing out all necessary steps, which was against the democratic principles. So all these issues were dealt with by the Honorable Supreme Court in its judgment. And the Supreme Court, with regards to all these issues, negative the contention of the petitioner, and ultimately in its concluding para observes that the Supreme Court declares that there is no infirmity in the grant of no objection by the Central Vista Committee, that is the CVC. Then the approval by the Delhi Urban Art Commission as per 1973 Act is correct. The prior approval of the Heritage Conservation Committee under the clauses of the building bylaws for Delhi are also correct. It also holds that the exercise of power by the central government under Section 11A2 of the Delhi Development Act is just and proper, and thus the modifications regarding the change in land use of plot number 2 to 8 in the master plan are also confirmed. It further recommends, with regards to the environmental clearance by expert appraisal committee, and grant thereof by the Ministry of Environmental Affairs is just, proper, and in accordance with law, including the 2006 notification. And therefore, the Supreme Court upheld the same, along with appropriate directions therein to ensure that the highlighted mitigating measures are followed by the project proponent in their letter and spirit. The project proponent may set up smog towers to adequate capacity as being integral part of the new parliament building project, and additionally use smoke guns at the construction site throughout the construction phase in the progress of the site. Uh, so ultimately, the Supreme Court, by a majority of two judges, upheld the entire redevelopment plan by issuing certain direction and also declaring that the proper approvals and objections were taken by the government in finalizing this plan. So that is what the Supreme Court has held. Also, with regards to the principle of sustainable development and with regards to environment and development, the Supreme Court has observed uh, that environment and development are not sworn enemies of each other, and it would be anomalous approach to consider environment as a hurdle in development and vice versa. The entities like Environment Appraisal Committee and the National Green Tribunal are created to strike a just balance between two competing interests, and a time-tested principle of striking this balance is timely invocation of mitigating environmental measures amidst a development activity. But it says that sustainable development and precautionary principles need to be understood in a proper context, and the expression sustainable development incorporates wide meaning within its soul. It contemplates that development ought to be sustainable with the idea of preservation of natural environment for present and future generation. Because it says that it is the duty of the present generation to think about the future generation with regards to environment. So it also holds that the right to development is an inalienable human right by virtue of which every human person and all peoples are entitled to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political development in which all human rights and fundamental freedoms can be fully realized. So, right to development is a part of human right which is inalienable and is available to all citizens, and without which all other fundamental freedoms cannot be fully realized. So certainly development is one of the most important aspect, and considering that the India country is at this stage in, and considering that it's going to be one of the most developed nations in the world in coming years, such type of development projects are extremely important for the country for the present and the future. The only thing is that it has to ensure that the environmental protection is also ensured. So this is what the Supreme Court has held. With regards to change in use of land, also the Supreme Court holds that the master plan does not say that there cannot be no change in change in use of land, and therefore it holds that it is incomprehensible as to how the proposed changes would be termed as substantial enough to alter the basic identity of the plan, or for that matter, of the zone concerned. So, because the changes in the plan was basically that the plot numbers 2 to 8, which was what also be changed, is that they were reserved originally for transportation, that is for bus parking, terminal, etc., for recreational purpose, for public and semi-public facilities, but which were now to be changed into having government offices and also recreational and government offices. So this was the only change in the plan. So the Delhi Development Act itself provides that the change in plan should not alter should not be so substantial. It alters the entire plan itself. But the Supreme Court held that this does not alter the entire plan, and therefore this was permissible, and it was done after taking necessary permission. So this is what the Supreme Court has held in the Central Vista judgment.
Thank you very much, Jeet, for explaining this in detail for the benefit of our viewers. And also, I like to add that in 100 years, the technology has improved almost like 10 times. So what was applicable 100 years back is obsolete now. So with government, it's not only the parliament; it has a Rashtrapati Bhavan, which is the resident for the president of India, and then there are in the Vista there is a provision to also build houses for vice president as well as for the prime minister. And at this point in time, very close by, there are various ministries which exist in different buildings, and this infrastructure like rail ministry, finance ministry, just to name a few, Sena Bhavan, which manages the army affairs. So for every ministry there is a dedicated ministry building nearby, and these are the 12 to 15 buildings actually govern Indian government. So they roll out all the plans, they roll out all the bureaucracy around the entire country. So it is very important to have a new system, more secure system, while keeping a balance. So I think this is the first step, building the larger parliament, and I think we should not stop there. We should also revamp all these ministry buildings, build a very secure infrastructure around them, and wherever there is a need to move between different government buildings, because people go from one building to other every time and then there are a lot of security involved and there is a lot of wastage of time. I have experienced this myself while pursuing some of these opportunities with the government. To enter this building, it takes about 4 to 5 hours because of the security clearance. So I think the central vista concept is very important because then the entire infrastructure can be secured and then you can move around using tunnels underground without impacting the environment. So I think there is a huge need to revamp the Indian governance system and all the ministries, especially when we are such a large country with so much of bureaucracy involved in running the day-to-day activity of the country. At the same time, having more member of parliament to represent Indians will also be beneficial for the federal system of the country. This is what I feel as a layman without even, I'm just talking in English, not talking anything in legal terms. But what is your opinion, Jeet?
Yes, absolutely. Because as the judgment itself mentions that today the country's population has increased to so many fold times, and it is more than 130 crores, and the entire country is being governed from this central vista, and therefore certainly it requires to be modern. It has to have adequate capacity, and also it requires to be up to date. And considering that in future, the future prospects, also it has to be redeveloped and modified. So certainly it's a welcome judgment, and hope that the construction and redevelopment completes by uh, before the 75th Independence Day, and it can reopen and welcome the G20 summit, which is to be hosted by India.
Yes, Jeet, in fact, there are new gadgets being implemented, new systems being implemented in the new parliament. And it's going to be completely paperless to start with. Everything will be recorded. There will be new type of surveillance system. And what I've heard, what I've read in the papers and what I've heard on the news is that there will be a separate entrance for president, and there will be separate entrance for prime minister and for vice president and for ministers. So the parliament will have adequate meeting rooms so that people, who want to meet the member of parliament will have adequate rooms, meeting rooms, etc., to be available. Because right now there is a huge shortage and adequate justice is not given to the system. So I think it's very important for us to move to a new parliament. And also from security point of view, considering there was a parliament attack way back in the early part of previous decade, I think it's important to have proper security for president, prime minister, and vice president. I think that is being provided here in the system. Um, Jeet, I think this is just a start. What do you say? I mean, there is an opportunity to convert the entire Central Vista, isn't it?
Um, well, that will be difficult because there are certain heritage sites, and Parliament is also a heritage site grade one. So it cannot be entirely well. It material changes can happen, but not a new entire development, because there has to be some restrictions on development in a heritage site. So considering those provisions, and with respect to environmental objections, otherwise within the permissible limits, everything can be changed.
Right. I think there is one building which I know for sure is the Rail Bhavan, which is extremely old, and from outside it looks very gorgeous and very jazzy because it looks like a palace. But from inside, it is almost crumbling. There is a rail museum there, and there is a railway ministry operating from there. I think some of the buildings can be selected and can be revamped because obviously railway is a very large ministry, requires it's one of the largest employer in the world and requires a proper building.
No, absolutely. Yes, infrastructure offices are very much required, and if efficiency is ultimately increased by having good offices and infrastructure facilities, then certainly that is the need of the hour.
And it is a very remarkable judgment by the Supreme Court giving clearance to the starting the construction of the parliament, and it will be done in less than 18 months. So I'm sure they will use the latest construction technology, modular approach, best technology to not only build the infrastructure, which is earthquake proof, fire proof, and will have the latest gadgets, completely paperless, um, with all new kinds of security, Wi-Fi, etc. So with this, we can end our discussion. Jeet, thank you very much for finding time and joining us in today's discussion. We will meet you next Thursday again in Legal Matters with something more interesting.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.